We hope you enjoyed this production from the Unitarian Universalist Church of Akron. If you would like more information about Unitarian Universalism or our community, please visit us at uuakron.org. The following recording is from the April 12, 2015 Sunday service titled Free and Responsible, led by Reverend Tim Termerson and Barret Bills. As Unitarian Universalists, we affirm the free and responsible search for truth and meaning. But what exactly does it mean to be both free and responsible? Are there times when freedom and responsibility are in conflict? Today's service will examine these questions through the lens of the recent violence and controversy surrounding the publication of satirical images of religious figures like the Prophet Muhammad. Tomorrow is Thomas Jefferson's birthday, and I'd like to begin with a quote from him. "Question with boldness even the existence of a God, because if there be one, he must more approve of the homage of reason than that of blindfolded fear." I couldn't recall hearing that quote before yesterday until it came verbatim from the mouth of the conservative pundit Glenn Beck, who was talking about how transformative he found it. Frankly, so do I. And as I was listening to this interview with Beck, I reflected on the moment when my mom gave me a copy of his book titled Arguing with Idiots, not realizing perhaps that I'm likely one of the idiots he was talking about. I feel compelled to mention what a privilege it is to have the opportunity to speak to this community, and that I'm so proud to be part of a tradition that affirms and promotes the free and responsible truth for search and meaning. As grateful as I am, I'm not here to talk about the privilege to speak, but the right to do so. The right to free expression, I believe, is sacrosanct and fundamental to both human creativity and the progress of our understanding, and to human flourishing. I have read and heard criticisms from those who see our principles as entirely banal, completely uncontroversial, who could argue with honoring people's worth and dignity. But sometimes it's not that simple. For me, these principles represent significant challenges in my spiritual and intellectual exploration and in my relationships. In fact, since Reverend Tim first approached me about this service, I've struggled with this seemingly adversarial relationship, this conflict between freedom and responsibility. Perhaps a good way to introduce this recent struggle is to give some background on the tragic event that prompted it. On January 7th of this year, in Paris, France, 12 people were murdered, including 11 staff members of the small French magazine Charlie Hebdo and a French national police officer. They were slain by two brothers, violent extremists claiming to act in the name of Islam. More on that police officer in a moment. The magazine was famous, or rather infamous, for its cartoons mocking political and religious figures. And the ideas came after Charlie Hebdo printed inflammatory images of the Prophet Muhammad, and not for the first time. As many of us know, images of the Prophet are considered blasphemy and forbidden by some of the more common interpretations of Islam. In the aftermath of the violence, many people, including many Muslims, expressed solidarity with the victims on social media by posting the hashtag Je suis Charlie, which translates to I am Charlie. I did so myself. And then I learned that the French officer Ahmed Barret, a Muslim, died trying to protect the lives of those magazine staffers. I cannot speak to Ahmed's thoughts as he lay wounded on the ground before dying from a gunshot to the head. Whatever his motivations, he died defending those whose free expression he almost certainly would have disagreed with. He became for me an embodiment of that phrase in the order of service born from the ideas of Voltaire, a champion of freedom of expression and of religion. I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. I went again to social media to express my solidarity with the fallen. Je suis Ahmed. I could only hope to be as brave in the face of evil. Which brings me back to my struggle. Can we be both free and responsible? Or are these mutually exclusive ideas? As Unitarian Universalists, are we Ahmed? Are we Charlie? Thankfully, Reverend Tim will be tackling those questions. And as we wrestled with this topic, Reverend Tim had the insight to distill the issue to a few more straightforward questions. And I was charged with the following. Why freedom? Why should we place so much emphasis on this value? So much so that we might defend those whose message we find offensive or possibly even dangerous. Well, for those of you who have learned about the history of Unitarian Universalism, perhaps through one of Reverend Tim's world religions classes, you would know that this faith tradition and many others might not have existed without that freedom. History and the present give us countless examples of cultures, governments, religious hierarchy, corporations, and individuals seeking to inhibit or silence the voices of those whose ideas, whose identities, whose desire for equality and justice stand at odds with those powerful institutions. Yet fending off the destructive forces of oppression, whatever form it comes in, while necessary, is not sufficient. Certainly, we should and must allow even those whom we disagree with to express their ideas. To that end, satire has long been an effective tool of critique for speaking truth to power, and we cannot silence it because it offends. But I believe that the true power of freedom of speech is the opportunity to listen, to encourage others to return to the table that they might be heard and perhaps listen themselves. In my experience, since I joined this community, whatever personal growth I have achieved has not come about merely as a result of being encouraged to speak my own mind, but by listening to your voices, to your ideas, and increasingly those ideas which I might have a bias against. It comes from entering into dialogue with them, from that creative friction that can result from sincere engagement. Words are not stones, but often they are hurled in a similar fashion to win an argument or to deny the value of others' perspectives. You see, silencing a person, degrading or ignoring their perspective doesn't change their mind to your way of thinking, but it does limit opportunities for the progress of understanding, creativity, and human flourishing. If we deny freedom, if we refuse to listen, we eliminate the possibility that we might be transformed and that others might also. If we embrace the freedom of others to speak and commit to listen, we can move past building walls that insulate us and build bridges instead.
Well, thank you, Barret. Really well done. Very well done. And it's been a joy working on this complicated topic with you. It's been a wonderful journey. I want to echo really everything Barret said about freedom of speech, all forms of expression, freedom of conscience. As people of faith who affirm freedom as a core religious value, we Unitarian Universalists are absolutely outraged by acts of violence and mass murder like the one against the staff of Charlie Hebdo. Free speech and freedom of conscience are never, ever justifications for violence. We are all Charlie. And as Barret said so well in his reflection, the freedom to think and speak and create and criticize, they have indeed been driving forces in the development of humankind. And I am so proud that we Unitarian Universalists have played a small but mighty role in shining that light of freedom and truth. For much of our history, we have offered bold and courageous critiques of society, the status quo, and especially of existing religious ideas and institutions. We have challenged frightening, and harmful conceptions of God. We have criticized the use of religion to exclude or to demean people for who they are, what they believe, or who they love. And we have stood against efforts to use the state to promote any religion or church, including our own. And as Barret said, freedom is so central to Unitarian Universalism, we lift it up in our 7 principles. We affirm the free and responsible search for truth and meaning and the right of conscience. But as our principles make clear, and as Barret said, with freedom does come responsibility. I think it's fair to say that in Unitarian Universalism, the word responsible is paired with freedom because we believe that everyone, that all people possess dignity and worth and deserve to be treated with, as Barret said, respect. My freedom is sacrosanct, but it must not be used as a weapon to harm or demean the worth and dignity of another person or another faith. While we can and do disagree with the ideas and beliefs of others, we use affirm that the dignity and respect we demand for ourselves is the birthright of all. So in our faith, freedom is not the freedom to demean or mock or to draw images that blatantly and deliberately insult the religion of another. Not that publishing those words or images should be illegal or censored. I think even the most well-intentioned censorship is a slippery slope, and I think few Unitarian Universalists are prepared to take that risk. But the kind of cartoons and images found in the pages of Charlie Hebdo, which we are intentionally not showing you today, they are not Unitarian Universalism. So I simply want to conclude this part of my remarks by saying that when it comes to defending freedom of conscience and speech, we are indeed Charlie. But because we believe that freedom should be exercised responsibly and with love, we are also not Charlie. As Barret said so well, we are seeking, always seeking, to build bridges, not to throw stones. Because we're a little behind on our time this morning, we're going to forego the reading from Howard Thurman. I'm sorry about that. It's a beauty, as everything from Howard Thurman is. I'll just tell you real quickly about it. In the mid-1930s, Thurman led a delegation of African-American Christians to India to learn about the religions there, Christianity, Hinduism, and others. In the course of that time, he met lots of interesting people, including Gandhi, but he had a very memorable encounter with a professor of religion, a Dr. Singh, and they got together to sort of swap notes and learn from one another. And in the morning, they kind of didn't hit it off. They were sort of clashing over sort of my Christian views and your Hindu views, and they were having trouble really hearing one another. And they were frustrated, and they came back after lunch and let their guards down and spoke to one another with love and compassion and generosity. And Thurman, in his description, talks about the absolute sheer mystical experience that he had in that moment when he felt as if his spirit and the professors were fusing together as one. I promise that reading at another service. It's wonderful. So I want to tell you another story, a story that happened to me that I think echoes what happens in this story about Howard Thurman and the professor in India. Although I think in some ways my experience was maybe a little bit of a tougher path to go down than Dr. Thurman, and the professor's name was Dr. Singh, had to travel. Now, this story takes place about a decade ago when I was still a seminary student. This time I was studying, doing my unit of chaplaincy at a hospital in the Boston area, and I, during that time, met a patient, a man named Mr. Walker. By the way, I looked it up. I told this story about 4 years ago, so if those of you who were taking notes, you may be hearing it again. But it's a good story. I think it's worth telling again. Mr. Walker had recently been diagnosed with an inoperable and incurable form of lung cancer, and he was a patient on the floor to which I was assigned. And when I walked into his room, I was expecting to see someone who was very weak and sickly, but he was in many ways just the opposite. He appeared sort of big and strong and vigorous and in good health. and he didn't appear particularly distraught or sad. In fact, he was eager to talk. So I introduced myself. Hi, I'm Tim. I'm the chaplain on this floor. How are you doing today? I'm okay, but who are you? What's your religion? What do you believe? So normally when I got this question first, I would try to dodge it a little bit because it's not about me, it's about the patient. I explained that I was not there representing any one religion, but I was an interfaith chaplain, and I just wanted to talk. Now, during my time at the hospital, I had found that being a UU could be something of a mixed blessing. You see, it would enable me, to be open and receptive to people of all faiths and to people of no faith at all. But being a UU would prove to be a challenge for when I visited patients who had what I would call a kind of an exclusivist my way or the highway approach to religion. So I usually played that whole interfaith chaplain thing and, only talked about UU if pushed. Well, Mr. Walker pushed. So, what denomination are you in? So I finally told him I was a UU and tried to explain it, not very well. And Mr. Walker looked me directly in the eye and then asked, "Chaplain, do you accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior?" So I fumbled with that one for a few seconds and finally told Mr. Walker that although I most assuredly consider Jesus to be a wonderful teacher, a prophet, and that I tried to embody his ethical teachings in my daily life, that I didn't see him as the Son of God. Well, Mr. Walker didn't particularly care for that answer, so he asked me an even tougher and more pointed question. How can you call yourself a chaplain or a minister if you don't believe that it was God's Son who died for your sins and for mine? Well, I wish I could tell you that after Mr. Walker asked this question that I was able to remain very calm and serene, that I was thinking positive and good-natured and loving thoughts. But I wasn't. I was feeling defensive and even angry. I remember thinking to myself, who is this guy? Who are you to be challenging my beliefs or my right to be a minister when you're the one who has so little love and compassion in your words? Well, Mr. Walker, I consider myself a chaplain because my job is not to represent any one religion or to convert you or anyone, but instead simply to listen and offer support to people like yourself who are in the hospital. Mr. Walker looked at me for what seemed like a very long time. The expression on his face softened a bit, and then he said in a pretty different tone of voice than before, "But chaplain, how can you help people if you yourself are lost and don't understand the truth about God and his Son, Jesus?" Well, I still can't really explain why, but at this moment, something in the room and something definitely inside of me began to shift and to change. Rather than feeling threatened, I began to sense that for all of his religious tough talk and bluster, Mr. Walker was really concerned about me. He wanted to help me, to teach me, to show me the path that he felt I needed to follow. So for the next 30 minutes, I listened as Mr. Walker shared his Christian faith with me. I have to say that much of what he said were things I had heard before, ideas that I simply could not accept or affirm. But the longer Mr. Walker talked, the more I came to realize that we were coming together and finding common ground in a way I hadn't imagined to be possible. You see, as I listened to Mr. Walker, I came to appreciate his Christian faith for what it meant to him, for how it brought him comfort and hope in this incredibly difficult time, and for how he wanted to share the gift that he had received with me. The longer I listened to him, the more I came to understand that I didn't have to agree with Mr. Walker in order to care about him and to respect his beliefs. After Mr. Walker finished telling me about his faith, I responded by telling him that I wasn't in a place in my own spiritual life where I could accept what he had said, but that I appreciated his willingness to share his faith with me. And I told him that I admired his commitment to his beliefs and that I could see how they had enriched his life. And then it happened. Something happened that I will never forget and that I would have never expected in a million years, especially given the start that Mr. Walker and I had gotten off to. As I got up to leave, Mr. Walker looked at me and said in a voice that was indeed filled with compassion and tenderness, he said, "Well, you're okay, chaplain. Keep doing what you're doing." And that, right there in that moment, that is what can happen when we as Unitarian Universalists listen, learn, and build relationships across our differences. In all of my time with Mr. Walker, I never once found myself agreeing with his theology or his beliefs. But you know what? Somehow that didn't matter. What mattered is that Mr. Walker and I came together and experienced a depth of connection and understanding that enriched and transformed my life in ways I could not have possibly imagined. And I hope the same thing happened for him. As Unitarian Universalists, we believe in the beauty and blessings of freedom. Freedom to speak your mind, to listen to your heart, to follow your conscience. Freedom has been, remains, and always will be the bedrock of this faith. But as I learned that day with Mr. Walker, freedom does not mean the freedom to hurl insults or to diminish and demean the other. Freedom, as Barret said so well, is a gift we must use to listen, to learn, and build bridges across our differences. Mr. Walker was discharged from the hospital soon after I talked, and I actually didn't get the chance to spend much time with him again. So let me just conclude by saying that although we shared little in common when I walked into his room that day, je suis Mr. Walker. I am Mr. Walker. He is part of me, and his words of love and support have blessed my life and will always inspire me. I'll never forget it. You're okay, chaplain. Keep doing what you're doing. Blessed be, and thank you so much for listening.
We hope you enjoyed this recording, and we'd like to finish by sharing the excerpt from Howard Thurman's autobiography, as spoken about by Tim. One glorious morning, we sat on the floor in searching conversation about the life of spirit, Hinduism, Buddhism, and Christianity. When lunchtime came, I had to keep an appointment. As I got up to leave, Dr. Singh looked at me and said, "I see you are chuckling." I replied that he was doing the same. "Perhaps we are reacting to the same thing." "Suppose you tell me first," he remarked. I said that we had spent our whole morning sparring for position. You from behind your Hindu breastwork, and I from behind my Christian embattlement. Now and then we step out from that protection, draw a bead on each other, and then retreat. "You are right," Dr. Singh replied. "When we come back together after lunch, let us be wiser than that." That afternoon, I had the most primary, naked fusing of total religious experience with another human being of which I have ever been capable. It was as if we had stepped out of social, political, cultural frames of reference and allowed two human spirits to unite on a ground of reality that was unmarked by separateness and differences. This was a watershed experience in my life. We had become a part of each other even as we remained essentially individual. I was able to stand secure in my place and enter into his place without diminishing myself or threatening him. That again was an excerpt from Howard Thurman's autobiography. We thank you again and encourage you to seek us out at uuakron.org.